So, before I even get into the topic of today's videos, I just want to preface this entire thing because I'm going to be comparing these games a lot in this video, but I genuinely love both WoW and FF14. While both of these games are MMOs with classes and crafting and raiding, and they feel similar at times that it can be tempting to declare a winner between the two, but that's not what this video is for. If you're a person that only wants to pay for one, then yeah, I can see the necessity behind finding a winner, but I really hate that mentality. The way I see it is, say you want a pizza. To me, when I want a pizza, I want traditional sauce, cheese, pepperoni, maybe mushrooms tops. But I also like buffalo chicken pizza. Maybe I don't get it as often, but I still like it, and it's great when I want a different flavor profile, but I still want a pizza. World of Warcraft and FF14 are MMOs with very different flavor profiles that scratch very different desires. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the variety of flavors I've tasted between the games recently, as I've been playing them a lot, and I finished everything I wanted in the last season of WoW, and for the first time in my FF14 career, I'm finally max level and ready to take on the new expansion just as it launches. That being said, since I have less experience with FF14, I'm going to start talking about that game first. FF14 has some of the best storylines to exist in fiction, straight up. The way the world functions and how the history and the universe works in the game is some of the most well-refined and believable in fiction, and it's almost unmatched in any other story that I've experienced. The FF14 community closely safeguards around spoilers of the story, so I'm not going to be discussing them here in solidarity. But if you want a story to truly get immersed in with very few plot holes, FF14 has got you covered. I will say at this point, it is many hours to go through, but it's a wild, thoughtful ride that has a genuine moral to its story, more than just a plot as an excuse for the characters to do the things they do. And honestly, wild and thoughtful ride kind of encompasses FF14 as a whole, and it kind of has to be more than most games. If the gameplay wasn't as carefully crafted as it is, the game would come crashing and crumbling down. And I hear what you're saying. If the gameplay wasn't thought out, the game would fail could be said about literally any game. But I promise, it applies in a knife-edge balance for FF14 more than most games. And to give you a better understanding of what I mean, I'm going to skip over and talk about World of Warcraft for a minute. World of Warcraft is the video game's video game. A big old world to explore, plenty of classes and subclasses to choose from, and the talent trees allow you to customize the way you play even further. Especially early on in WoW's history, there wasn't much as the way of a story, but the quests get you out into the world to earn rewards. Early World of Warcraft would be the antithesis to FF14. World of Warcraft says, here's a big world and a dagger, go kill some boars and get me some pigskins and I'll get you a leather vest, maybe. FF14, on the other hand, is a very guided experience. It tells you exactly what you should do from 1 to 90, and even today, modern World of Warcraft is much more of a figure-out experience when compared to FF14, as WoW doesn't gate as much of its content behind story progression, whereas literally everything is gated by story progression in FF14. But to me, the defining difference between the gameplay of the two games, the very thing that guides the difference in philosophy of the gameplay experience between the games, is the talent trees, or the lack thereof. The Dragonflight expansion has brought back the old expansive talent trees more akin of the olden day talent trees rather than Cataclysm and later, and by God were they needed. Maybe I'm hungry, but here comes another food analogy. FF14 is like going out to a Michelin restaurant that has 3 things on a menu, but when you order, damn is it good. The plating and presentation is perfect. The steak is cooked to perfection with an immaculate sauce and the freshest veggies. The only thing about this restaurant though, is they absolutely will not make substitutions. You get what you get. If you don't like the rotation but like the class thematics, you just kind of shit out of luck. World of Warcraft though is like cooking at home, with the talent system allowing you to make substitutions to your recipe. And even if you are finding your recipe online, you can at least try the recipe first, then you can maybe add more salt, or more single target, or more AoE. When compared to FF14 combat, WoW combat is all about choice. And this is kind of what I meant by FF14 loads precariously on the knife's edge. When you play a class in FF14, you can't change it in any way. You can kind of gear differently with materia to get, which are the gem equivalent in FF14, so you can kind of get your own build with stat differences, but that's it. There's no changes to the talents or abilities you get. You just get what you get with your classes. And then the story is mandatory for a ton of content to unlock. So if you get bored of the story and you don't like the story, you won't be able to experience the rest of the content. FF14 bets its entire existence that you like what it has to offer, and their team does a great job about making sure the classes and storyline are experiences worth having. I'm going through the patch content of Endwalker for FF14, and the story is just going to show that even though they have just concluded the major story of all the previous expansions, there's still so many more intriguing stories to tell and things to discover. Then when it comes to gameplay, while I haven't played every class at high level, most that I have played at high level are so thematic and satisfying. I've just maxed Monk and its rotation just feels so cool and flexible. Samurai, while I haven't maxed it out yet, I have it at 80, and it may be a little over-designed at max level in my opinion, but it is one of the most badass, satisfying classes I've ever played. Making a melee class sit still just for a few seconds to cast to unleash a tactical nuke feels just amazing. And Dragoon feels sick, jumping around doing these dragon-themed attacks. But if I had one bone to pick with FF14 classes, is that sometimes you're expected to play a half-baked class. I'm going to use Summoner for an example here. Summoner was my first class to 90, so I'm speaking from a max level experience for this one. This class kind of exemplifies my issue with FF14 class design. Every expansion, as you might expect, introduces new abilities and capabilities for each class. Summoner, for a long time, suffered from just massive button bloat and kind of lack of a good identity and thematic. So as of the latest expansion, Endwalker, they reworked the class. And it's cool. The thematic is definitely more centralized and around the summons, as it should be. But it's kind of awkward at some parts of the rotation, and I can't help but feel that it was purposely made this way so they can introduce new moves and further expansions that will smooth out the awkwardness that just doesn't sit right with me. Summoner is technically a caster class, and your main cooldown is rotating through your main summons of either Bahamut or Phoenix. Once the big summon times out, and before the next big one is ready, you summon 3 smaller summons that alter your main rotational ability while giving you 1 extra move themed around the summon. My annoyance comes in with Ifrit's little combo ability. Ifrit's combo ability rushes me in a ranged class into melee. Then I have to use a second melee move, then nothing else in melee. There's no other ability to get me out of melee, so I have to just walk out of melee like a loser. Even if most of Summoner's casts are instant casts, it still feels weird needing to just walk out of melee if I want or need to be ranged again. This to me is just begging for a future mobility move of some kind that it just doesn't have right now, but I would bet money it will get in Dawntrail, the upcoming expansion. I know it has to happen so that it gives the devs room to add more over time without needing to instantly rework every class, but I can't help but think that WoW talents would let me talent out of the awkward ability that I didn't like, or let me make my rotation play into the weirdness so it makes sense. The current FF14 design philosophy just feels a little weird to me. Then also with Summoner, your main defensive is tied with your very basic summon that doesn't really do anything, so you can only use your major defensive when you're not doing anything else, and that just feels insane to me, because any other class can be doing whatever they want to do and still use their major defensive. This game just feels clearly not designed around PvP, because holy moly, that is insane. As a Dragonflight, World of Warcraft got traditional large talent trees back and returned to what World of Warcraft does best. Customization of your combat experience. Combat is like 90% of the World of Warcraft experience, and World of Warcraft allows you to pick a class, then pick a specialization in that class, then pick from dozens of talents to finally establish how you will experience and interact with the world. The best of the talent trees allow you to pick your talents to fit the content you're doing, and even for the type of content, flex it a little bit for how you want to play. I think the reworked Demon tree is a great example of this. The main emphasis is a lot of movement-based builds revolving around using Vengeful Retreat and Fell Rush offensively in your rotation. It's such a fun and unique playstyle among all the other classes, but it's also definitely one of the trickier playstyles they have right now. Not because the inherent skill and execution for the rotation is hard, but with all the required movement, your situational awareness needs to be drastically higher than most classes you play. For me, there are some fights I felt like, nah fam, I can't keep sense of all these mechanics and move around all over the place, so I changed my talents around to the not moving style of Demon Hunter play, which is still adequately powerful to clear content, and it felt much better for me until I learned the fights better, so that then I can come back to those fights with the movement build while understanding what's everything that's going on. Granted, some class talent trees are better than others at providing good alternatives and gameplay options, rather than here's the single target talents and here's the AoE talents. And I think some of the specs are just kind of outdated in general, but overall, the talents are a huge step in the right direction for really exemplifying what makes WoW actually fun. I'm really hoping and looking forward to what kind of gameplay experiences I'll be able to make with the hero talents coming with War Within. That's mostly what I wanted to say about gameplay stuff, but I wanted to make a few small notes about the worlds of the two games. Now, don't get me wrong, FF14's world and story are so much more consistent and well executed, but if I had one small gripe with FF14's world, I have no idea how the actual lands correlate to each other. There are so many invisible walls and loading screens in between zones that it's just jarring. Like, this map of Lenosha drives me insane. There's not actually these like spaghetti noodles that connect each of the regions, so why are they there? I guess it's to separate them out a little bit so you can see them better and the separate regions better, but when you separate them out like this and you can't just freely travel through the regions, you're literally just putting a physical representation of your loading screens on your map, and it just drives me insane. On the other hand, for Azeroth, there are so few loading screens, so few limitations on the actual explorable area, which are even less with dynamic flight being introduced. And I've been able to experience how the zones are connected, and I can tell you just at the top of my head, like Elwyn Forest goes into Westfall, which goes into Duskwood, which goes into Stranglethorn Vale. And while the story they try to force feed us in WoW might not be as good as FF14's, but the lack of limitations on exploring make me feel like I've lived on Azeroth much more so than FF14's world, even after getting to 90 on multiple classes now on FF14. That may change as I come to play even more in FF14 and understand how things work, but I think also because World of Warcraft lacks true fast travel to go wherever you want, whenever you want, helps into the fact where you understand how the lay of the land works more than FF14, where you can just zip zoop zop to any aetheryte in FF14. It also doesn't help that the disjointed feeling of the zones bleeds into the major party content as well. The small party content and the huge party content will actually take place in real places, but for the major trials and raids, all the fights take place in these magically perfect circles or squares that are usually just floating around in space. And while most raid bosses and boss fights end up in rooms like this anyway in WoW, I appreciate that WoW at least attempts to give you the impression that everything you do in the game is a part of the world itself. And almost every raid has at least one fight where the environment is a key or notable factor in the fight that you just don't get in FF14. Jaina immediately comes to mind. The Jailer, Halandris, and Denathrius also come to mind as fights that just wouldn't be the same if it was on some perfect magical square or circle. And granted, Halandris and Denathrius both take place on perfect circles and squares, but the fact that they take place in an actual place, with the mirrors and Denathrius and the actual bridge between the two major zones in Halandris, makes it more memorable as a place rather than just a magical circle or square. That all being said, I've been kind of going in on my relatively minor gripes with FF14, but one of the coolest things FF14 has that WoW doesn't have really comparable content to is Ultimates. Ultimates are FF14's hardest raid content, executed in absolutely fantastic fashion, where the plain square circle rooms actually kind of make sense. The Ultimates are a bard's retelling of your most fantastic fights over the course of the game. These range from fighting multiple bosses at once, or at the very least dealing with multiple mechanics of multiple bosses at the same time. They also have puzzle mechanics, where these mechanics will pretty much just repeatedly wipe you unless something is done in a certain way. And these fights don't have PTRs, so they can't be data mined and are just absolutely chaotic. I just think a bard's retelling of fights that result in just an amalgamation of a fight would fit so good into WoW. I don't know, I just particularly would like a hard raid difficulty in WoW that is just popped on the community with little to no testing, that is also completely fresh and different from the current raid at the time. I don't really have any interest in doing a raid on Mythic after doing it already on Normal and Heroic, and there just isn't some drastically cool new reward. Being a completely different experience is reward enough, honestly. I don't do mythic raiding in WoW, but I'm extremely interested in trying ultimates, even though the content is at least as difficult, if not more. Just because the experience of doing the content is wild all in itself. These fights are very reminiscent of mythic phases of old in WoW that they used to do and now use pretty sparingly. Like, imagine if they came out with an ultimate raid for World of Warcraft, where it's a bard or a young soldier trying to understand your experience of Warlords of Draenor, let's say. And they're like, wow, you defeated all the leaders of the Orc clans? And we could finally get this all-out brawl with all the Orc clan leaders that we never really got. First phase, you could have Ner'zhul and Kargath at the same time, and you have to break Ner'zhul's zombie wave, and you have to somehow kite Kargath into the zombie wall instead of his traditional fire pillars. And that's just the first idea that comes to mind. There are just endless possibilities. For later phases, you would have just different combinations of the different Orc leaders, and it would just be absolutely awesome. And I love the fact that these are told by bards, or these could be stories told to new soldiers at taverns in WoW, because just kind of emphasizes the goofiness of it rather than it's being this important thing you need to do to see the whole story. And if these are like new soldiers that you're telling the story to, these could introduce new characters who get introduced to the story down the line, influenced by your heroic deeds, and one day this character finally gets to fight side by side with you. It's just the kind of storytelling that WoW would really benefit from, I think. I don't think WoW is going to get this kind of content anytime soon, so I'm just going to leave the rest to your imagination. So for this video, that is most of what I want to cover. It is kind of just like an overview of the important differences between the games. I don't know when exactly, but I do want to make future videos going more in depth on individual classes from both games and talk about them from the perspective of their own game, because I think there's so much to talk about between these two games. Anyways, hope to talk to you again soon, and remember to stay toasty.